If you want to understand whether a society truly mastered seafaring, don't look first at their sails or navigation, look at how they handled filth. Disease has ended more voyages than storms ever did, and on a cramped wooden ship with dozens of men, freezing spray, and no fresh water to spare, human waste was not a minor inconvenience. It was a lethal threat. Norse sailors crossed the North Atlantic centuries before germ theory, yet they avoided the kind of shipborne epidemics that crippled later navies. That wasn't luck. It was discipline, routine, and a practical understanding of sanitation that came from hard experience. If you stick with this, you'll see that Viking-age crews solved problems modern sailors still wrestle with, and they did it using principles that remain relevant for anyone thinking seriously about long-term survival in confined spaces. They began by understanding that waste had to leave the ship immediately, not be managed aboard it. Norse longships and Nars were open vessels, low to the water, with no enclosed decks. This design choice mattered. When a sailor needed to relieve himself, he went to the side of the ship, or the stern, and did it directly into the sea. There were no holding containers, no latrine boxes, and no attempt to store waste. The ocean was treated as a moving disposal system, constantly flushing contamination away. From a disease prevention standpoint, this was critical. Fecal matter never accumulated near sleeping areas, food storage, or drinking water. The location of waste disposal followed strict unwritten rules. Sailors relieved themselves downwind and away from the steering oar whenever possible. This wasn't superstition. Wind and wave direction could throw spray back onto the hull, and contamination of hands or clothing was a serious risk. Experienced crews knew how to read these conditions instinctively. A modern application of this thinking is straightforward. In any open water or wilderness setting, waste disposal should always be positioned downhill, downwind, and downstream from living areas. The Vikings practiced this daily, not as theory, but as habit. Ships themselves were kept deliberately bare. Longships carried few internal structures, which reduced surfaces where waste residue could linger. Deck planks could be lifted and washed with seawater. Salt water was used aggressively as a cleaning agent. While salt water does not sterilize in a modern sense, it does reduce bacterial survival and physically removes contaminants. Crews routinely rinsed decks, oars, and working areas, especially after storms when waste, vomit, and bilge water mixed. This constant flushing prevented the buildup of organic matter that breeds disease. The practical lesson here is about flow. Stagnation is the enemy of health, whether on a Viking ship or in a modern survival shelter. Personal hygiene was enforced socially rather than formally. Norse culture placed strong emphasis on reputation and honor, and being known as foul or careless endangered ones standing aboard ship. Sailors washed their hands and faces using seawater, sand, or ash as abrasive cleaners. Ash, rich in alkaline compounds, breaks down grease and organic residue. This was an early form of soap use. Before handling food, before rowing shifts changed, and after relieving themselves, sailors cleaned their hands, because failure to do so could affect the entire crew. Applying this today means recognizing that hygiene routines must be embedded into daily workflow, not treated as optional extras. Food and waste were kept strictly separated in both space and timing. Meals were prepared and eaten away from the sides of the ship where waste disposal occurred. Food was stored in sealed barrels or tightly wrapped bundles, often elevated to avoid bilge water. Drinking water, when carried, was protected obsessively. Contaminating water meant risking the entire voyage. The Norse did not need microbiology to understand cause and effect. Crews that fouled their water died. Crews that protected it lived. For modern survival planning, this reinforces a core rule: never compromise water safety, even briefly. Another overlooked factor was crew size management. Longships were not overcrowded beyond functional limits. Every man had a defined role in physical space. Overcrowding accelerates disease transmission, especially gastrointestinal illness. Norse shipbuilders balanced manpower against space deliberately. This is relevant today in emergency shelters or boats, where exceeding capacity dramatically increases health risks. Cold also played a role, though it was not relied upon. Low temperatures slowed bacterial growth, especially during northern voyages. However, sailors did not assume cold alone would protect them. Waste was still removed immediately, and hygiene practices remained constant year-round. The takeaway here is that environmental advantages only work when paired with discipline. What emerges from all this is a sanitation system without infrastructure, but not without intelligence. Norse sailors treated waste as something to be expelled instantly, distanced themselves from it physically, and cleanse all surfaces relentlessly. They did not romanticize hardship. They respected it. That respect kept them alive long enough to trade, raid, settle, and return home. If you're a historian, this reframes Viking seamanship as biologically savvy, not merely bold. If you're a survivalist, it's a reminder that sanitation is never secondary. You can have the best shelter and the strongest crew, but mishandled waste will end you quietly. If this kind of grounded, unsanitized history matters to you, subscribe to Strange History, share this with someone who still underestimates the basics, and keep digging. The past still knows things we ignore at our own risk.